I'm standing in front of what was and still is the Old Bailey Courthouse in London, where of course the trial of Charles Darnay and his treason case would have happened in Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And if you take a look, you see the lovely Gothic architecture here. You see the Gothic arches, very characteristic of the time. It's a very intimidating type place. But if you remember, the way that Charles actually was found innocent, I guess you would call it innocent of the crime, Sidney Carton, the man who seemingly was paying no attention at all to what was going on in the trial, who was sitting and staring at the ceiling, was the one who actually came up with the idea that he actually looked, when he took off his wig, remarkably similar to the defendant. And when the two witnesses who were testifying about what these awful things that Charles had done and what a terrible spy he was for the evil sister of France, when they couldn't finger him out anymore, they couldn't point to him because they couldn't really say, and the jury could really see, that there was a remarkable resemblance between these two men. Now I think you should stop for a second and realize what Dickens is doing here, because it's really, really important. Charles, for the most part, being in that courthouse and knowing how they treat most of their criminals, he was as good as dead. And bringing him to this situation where he can be freed, doesn't that go along somewhat with the theme that we've already had in this book with Dr. Manette earlier? Aren't we going to tie things in a little bit in that case? And afterwards, after he's set free, he has this amazing conversation with Sidney Carton, who's a really fascinating character, who's really important in this novel. And I think we should take a second and imagine somewhat what that conversation would have been like, and why Dickens did it that way. And again, everything he does wraps in really well to the theme of what's going on. So imagine you're sitting down to dinner with a man you just freed from certain death, and he looks just like you. You handsome devil. I know. But anyway, you have to consider what Sidney is saying here. He's looking at Charles, who looks just like him, and has the greatest situation that he can think of right now anyway. He's just been freed. He's a free man living in England instead of France, where he would have been in seemingly somewhat of trouble. And the beautiful young Miss Manette seems to have some sympathy towards him, which Sidney seemingly seems to think that he might like in some respects. But Sidney says that he cares for no man and no man cares for him. He's a very lowly man, but look at what he's looking at. A representation of himself, which is ideally what he would like his life to be. If we're talking about the best of times and the worst of times, this is about as clear-cut as you can get as sticking to the theme. You have a man who has been recalled to life, and you have a man who is looking what he wishes he could be, but at the same time, he knows he's not really living up to it. It's really important to think about in the rest of this novel what Sidney's going to do to try to be the best of what he can be, instead of the worst to what he currently is.